Scary True Funeral Home Stories. A small, dimly lit funeral home located on the outskirts of a decaying town. The funeral home has a long history, and the staff is used to the morbid, quiet routine of embalming bodies, preparing funerals, and handling the remains of the dead. There's a cold and oppressive atmosphere in the air. The camera pans slowly over dark, shadow-filled hallways with funeral wreaths and old family portraits lining the walls. Main characters: Claire, a young, ambitious mortician eager to prove herself in the business. Frank, the older, experienced funeral director, quiet and seemingly wise, but with an unsettling, calm demeanor. Linda, a grieving mother, recently bereaved of her son. Charlie, a grizzled embalmer with a history of strange occurrences in the funeral home, setting the scene. Claire had never imagined a place like the Grayson Funeral Home would be so alive with dread. The towering, aging building stood isolated at the edge of a decaying town, its once grand brick facade now crumbling, marred by years of neglect. The sign outside, an iron monument to death, had long since lost its shine, leaving only a rusted outline of letters. Grayson Funeral Home. It seemed forgotten, not just by the living, but by time itself. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of embalming chemicals, the pungent odor of formaldehyde, and the stale scent of aged wood that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. The corridors were long and dimly lit, the walls lined with old family portraits and funeral wreaths, the faces in them seeming to watch her every step. The muffled hum of the old furnace in the cremation room felt more like a heartbeat than a mechanical sound. Claire stepped inside with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. She had always been drawn to the macabre, and now, as a young mortician eager to prove herself, this job was her chance to show she had the skill to make a real name in the business. She wasn't prepared for how oppressive the place felt, how cold the air seemed even when she was standing in the warm light of the front office. Her first day was spent under the quiet, watchful eye of Frank, the funeral director. He was an older man, with a thick mane of gray hair and a face etched with years of solemnity. His quiet demeanor was unsettling. He'd seen it all, and his experience was evident in the way he carried himself. Calm, detached, with an unsettling aura of control. "Welcome to Grayson's, Claire," he had said when she'd first arrived. His voice was gravelly, like a man who had long ago forgotten how to laugh. "Don't let the place get to you. It's all routine." His words were meant to reassure her, but Claire could already feel the unease settling over her like a second skin. As night fell, the funeral home's true nature began to reveal itself. The family of the deceased, a grieving mother named Linda and her son's close relatives, arrived for the viewing. Claire did her best to keep it together, professionally preparing the body for the family's visit. The son, Adam, had died under mysterious circumstances, suddenly, violently, and with no clear explanation. The body was unnervingly cold to the touch, as if it had been left out in the night air too long. "You sure this is normal?" Claire had asked Frank, her hand lingering over the cold skin of the young man on the embalming table. Frank gave her a sidelong glance. "It's always like that. Don't question it." His voice was curt, leaving no room for further discussion. After the family left, Claire stayed behind with Frank to finish the final arrangements. That's when the unease began to escalate. The air in the building felt different, heavier. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. It was subtle at first, a fleeting glimpse of movement in the corner of her vision, the faintest sound of something scuttling across the floor. Then it started. A soft scratching sound emanated from the morgue, followed by whispers she couldn't quite place. "Did you hear that?" Claire asked, her voice shaky. Frank didn't even look up from his paperwork. "It's the house. Old buildings do that." But Claire wasn't so sure. Her instincts told her something else was at play, and the longer she stayed, the more it seemed as if the funeral home itself was trying to communicate something, as if it had a life of its own. The whispers grew louder, and that was when Charlie, the embalmer, approached her with a story that made her blood run cold. Charlie had been working at Grayson's for over 20 years. His rugged appearance, his hair long, face grizzled, belied a sense of unease that even the most seasoned mortician couldn't ignore. He was the kind of man who spoke sparingly, but carried a deep sense of knowing in his eyes. Late one evening, as Claire worked alone in the embalming room, Charlie sat down beside her and began telling her the story of a man named James Cordell, a man who had once come through the funeral home under equally mysterious circumstances. "He was murdered," Charlie said, his voice low. "That's what the cops said. His body, well, it wasn't treated like others." Charlie paused, as if the words tasted bad on his tongue. His body was never properly identified. No one knew who did it, and the investigation went nowhere. But there's a rumor that the man who murdered him still walks these halls. Claire's heart hammered in her chest. "You think the funeral home is haunted?" Charlie shrugged. "I don't know about ghosts, but there's something wrong here. The place has a history, Claire, and not all of it's been buried." The more she learned about the history of Grayson's, the more Claire began to understand that the dark energy she felt was not just the result of a funeral home's grim routine. Something terrible had happened here, something that still lingered in the walls, in the shadows. One night, Claire found herself unable to sleep. She lay awake staring at the dark ceiling, the faintest sound of whispers floating through the air like a forgotten memory. Her eyes drifted to the photographs of past funerals on the walls, their faded smiles now twisted into grotesque expressions. She'd seen some of the bodies in those photos. Some had been disturbingly altered, their features unnaturally stretched, their eyes wide in terror. Charlie's story echoed in her mind. The murderer's ghost still haunts the halls. Unable to bear it any longer, Claire dug deeper into the funeral home's records. She found old photographs in a hidden drawer, photos of bodies, previous residents of the funeral home, many of whom had strange, disturbing features. Some had unnaturally pale skin, others looked almost wrong. She shuddered as she realized that many of the bodies in the photos had the same strange, unnatural look as Adam's. The pieces began to fall into place. Claire started to suspect Frank had more to do with these unexplained deaths than he had ever let on. Something about the way he acted, his secretive manner, the way he dismissed her concerns, made her uneasy. She began to investigate further, finding evidence of a cover-up, a buried history of mishandled bodies and staged deaths. Her paranoia began to grow. It wasn't just Frank's silence anymore. It was the shadows that seemed to move when no one was there, the creaking doors that opened of their own accord, the whispers she could now hear clearly in the morgue. One night, Claire stumbled upon something she hadn't expected, an old, sealed-off embalming room beneath the funeral home. It had been hidden for years, but now Claire stood before its heavy iron door. Inside, she found remnants of rituals, dark symbols scrawled on the walls, old bloodstains, and what looked like pages from a long-forgotten book. It wasn't just the dead who had been treated in Grayson's. The place had been a site for illegal ceremonies, rituals that involved far more than just the embalming of the body. The funeral home had been a front for something darker, something that Frank had been complicit in for years. As Claire's realization set in, the air grew colder, and the ghost of James Cordell materialized before her. His body, decayed but still vivid, stood at the doorway. He was the murderer's ghost, seeking revenge, and now he wanted Claire to join him. With nowhere else to run, Claire made her choice. She couldn't let the truth die with the ghosts. She had to expose the horror of Grayson's, even if it meant risking everything to do so. Claire managed to escape Grayson's that night, her body bruised and bloodied. But she was free. She never looked back as she drove away. But the nightmare didn't end there. The town remained oblivious, unaware of the sinister history behind the funeral home. The secrets Claire had uncovered, secrets of murder, deceit, and dark rituals, were buried deep within the walls. Frank's fate remained a mystery, and the funeral home continued to operate, cursed, its legacy far from over. As Claire drove down the dark road, she glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. A shadowy figure stood behind her in the back seat. The ghost of James Cordell. He wasn't done with her yet. In the final moment, Claire's hand reached for a letter that had arrived earlier that day. It was an invitation to take over the funeral home as its new director. As she opened it, her heart sank. The letter was signed with a familiar name, Frank. This wasn't an invitation for a job. It was a summons to join the family, a family of death.